Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Chaser for PC. This review is coming to you courtesy of James Zero. He sent me this, so thank you. It is greatly appreciated. This is a first-person shooter developed by Cauldron and published by Joe Wood back in 2003, although Joe Wood has since become part of Nordic Games. But suffice to say, this was a bargain bin FPS from the very beginning. I mean, you can just easily tell that by looking at it, and looking at the features list and things like that. Which I'll get to that more when I get later on into this review. But Chaser is one of those games where you pretty much know it's not going to be that great going into it, so the question becomes, is it at least decent? Is it worth the $5 they're asking for, or is it something else entirely? Well, before we really get into the meat of the game, let's first talk about the presentation, which, well, let's face it, it came out in 2003, and they said it boasts state-of-the-art graphical features and is perfectly suited for rendering large environments. But the frame drops and things like that would, of course, say otherwise, even on fairly modern hardware. It's kind of sad, actually. Now, that said, it actually does not look that bad, even by today's standards. It looks very dated, sure, but they did actually put a fairly decent amount of detail into a lot of the environments and the modeling and animation and things like that. So it doesn't look horrible, it just looks dated. And admittedly, 3D does age not quite as well as 2D, so you gotta keep that in mind. Now that said, again, it doesn't look bad. There's also a lot of that whole brown and gray and realistic crap going on. So there's a lot of gray in this thing. A lot of gray. Holy crap, there's a lot of gray. And there's often some instances where the enemies will just blend in with the environment way too well, making it very hard to see them. It gets kind of infuriating, actually. But other than that, the visuals work out okay. But that's about it. And you also got to keep in mind what came out the next year. Half-Life 2 and Doom 3. Yeah, they left this thing in the dust. Now that said, there's also something about the visuals that amuses me to no end, but I'm actually going to get to that when I get to the story and the gameplay part. As far as the sound design goes, this is where things really fell apart in terms of the presentation. These sound effects are basically stock sounds, as in the kind of things you find in stock sound packs. They're not very good at all. A lot of the weapons have basically no punch to them, and the environmental sounds and everything just sound standard at best. Then there's the voice acting, which is horrible. In a lot of cases, it's horrible in the best of ways. It's just incredibly cheesy and just hammy, ridiculous things that are being said. The actors are clearly not taking it very seriously, but other times it's actually pretty cringe-worthy, so that becomes a problem. Then there's the music, which is very, very repetitive, but at least it's action-oriented, which is what this game's kind of all about. But then we come to the story and the gameplay, and this is where things get interesting. You see, this is one of those games. If you don't know what kind of game I'm talking about, allow me to read you the About the Game section, which gives you pretty much everything you need to know about the plot in this game. And there's a reason I have to actually read it as opposed to just talking about it, because reading it just makes it so much better. So, and I quote, Mars, 2044. The UN establishes Mars Corp, Martian Security and Economics Committee, under the leadership of Samuel Longwood. In the years that follow, the UN gradually loses control of Mars Corp, mainly due to the non-transparent license policy of its director. Longwood uses his autonomous status to create vassal relations between the corporations and Mars Corp. The unshakable power position of Mars Corp is supported by the companies, and thus they acquire additional rights and licenses. Longwood and his consortium become extremely wealthy from this arrangement. However, dissenting voices in Mars Corp begin to challenge Samuel Longwood's authoritarian policy. They demand his dismissal as director and a complete redistribution of the mining rights. But Samuel Longwood keeps an ace up his sleeve for occasions like this. Chaser awakens on board the spaceship HMS Majestic. He doesn't know who he is, what he's doing here, why he is being sought by men in black uniforms, and what they will do to him when they find him. The player's goal is to find out who Chaser really is and why he is being hunted. The story leads the player from the HMS Majestic to Montauk City on Earth, then on to Siberia, and finally to Mars, where the trail ends and hopefully the truth can be found. Now, after that wonderful description, you're probably wondering why I even need to say anything about the plot at all. I mean, it pretty much speaks for itself, right? It sounds like a B-movie, only even on the lower end of the B-movie spectrum. Well, it's more than just that. The way they actually tell the plot in the game is pretty terrible. You see, the game advertises an engaging storyline. In the search for his identity, Chaser becomes involved in a plot full of twists and turns. Yeah, he sure does. As in, a lot of the stuff doesn't really make a whole hell of a lot of sense. It was probably badly translated from Slovakian. And as a result, you're just kind of left scratching your head and end up not giving a crap at all. It is not engaging in the slightest. It is, however, very irritating. You see, a lot of this is done with Chaser having these sudden flashbacks, where you'll just be going through a level and all of a sudden it'll start flinging images in your face with really, really loud sound effects playing over it. And it just gets obnoxious. There's all these still images that are rather disconnected from what you're doing. Now, on occasion it kind of makes sense and it goes into a cutscene or something like that that actually tells you more of the backstory and things like that. But unfortunately, none of this is engaging. In fact, it gets rather annoying because it detracts from the actual gameplay. Now, the gameplay is where things get really interesting because we have wonderful things like the key features list to reference. I keep coming back to this, I know, but this is the source of just pure gold for this thing. And I quote, "Authentic weapons. Nearly all the weapons in the game are modeled on real-life equivalents. The developers placed a great deal of emphasis on building detailed replicas." Yep. Apparently in the future of 2044, we're still using P226s and M4s and the FAMAS and things like that. It's wonderful. Nothing in this game really makes any sense whatsoever. They never really explain why they wouldn't be using things like lasers or hell, plasma guns or things like that. Anything futuristic. No. We're using stuff from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Because that makes sense, right? Ugh. At any rate, the weapon selection is actually fairly decent. You have a variety of things that serve different roles. Unfortunately, a lot of it feels kind of samey. And you don't really feel like your weapons have much oomph to them until you get things like the sniper rifle, which is super powerful. But when you're actually trying to take down an enemy, they don't react to your shots. So you can put a lot of rounds into that enemy and you don't know it until they actually fall over. Or you can just aim for a headshot and you pretty much instantly drop them. So emphasizes accuracy, I guess, but at the same time it gets really annoying because of that fact that you can't really tell that you're hitting them. The blood puffs in the game are actually too small to really be able to see them because a lot of the engagements are taking place at a fairly decent range. So you have this problem of not being able to tell if you're doing much damage or not until the enemy actually falls over. Meanwhile, they're pretty accurate. They're hitting you fairly consistently and doing quite a bit of damage to you, so that gets very, very annoying. Now the sad part is, the weapon handling is pretty much the best part of the game, because the rest of it is a confused jumble of corridors and just awkward level design in general that leaves you scratching your head at some points because you'll manage to get yourself turned around, and there's not really much in the way of direction to help you out. Or it's an extremely linear game where you're pretty much railroaded into various bits and pieces. And so that gets confusing too. It's kind of inconsistent that way. And even worse, there's certain levels of the game where it's like, hey, we're going to throw in mandatory stealth. You get spotted, you instantly fail the mission and have to start all over again. Yeah, it sucks. So the single player leaves a lot to be desired as far as level design goes. And then there's this other fun bit. Highly developed AI. They pretty much just stand there and shoot at you. And they don't really take cover or flank you or use numbers to their advantage or anything like that. They just stand there and shoot at you. Because apparently standing there and shooting at you is highly advanced AI. I mean, I wouldn't expect enemies to do that. Would you? I mean, it's unthinkable. At any rate, the single-player campaign leaves a lot to be desired. And then there's the two things I actually can't test, which is multiplayer support via GameSpy as well as dedicated servers. Well, GameSpy shut down, so can't do that, and numerous multiplayer modes, including team play modes in the style of Counter-Strike and Team Fortress, as well as Deathmatch and Capture the Flag. Again, can't test either of those, because nobody plays this thing. And even if they did, GameSpy shut down, so you can't really play it without using workarounds like Game Ranger or something like that. And even then, I don't really think that the multiplayer would really be any good. If it's anything at all like the single player, it would be mediocre at best. And so what you're left with is Chaser, a budget bargain bin FPS that is currently being sold for $5 on Steam. I've seen a lot better, I've seen a lot worse, but this game is pretty headache-inducing for me because I had to restart it multiple times. A lot of the time I would just start it up, forget about it, end up accidentally deleting it or something like that, and then having to reinstall it and start all over again. Over and over and over again. It got pretty infuriating. So admittedly, that's very much a me problem, but the rest of the game speaks for itself, really. It's just not good. Is it worth $5? I don't know, I guess you could do worse, but it's not a good game. I give it a 2 out of 5. Thanks for watching.